Today we have a 350 Z 2003 making some, I don't know if the phone can pick that up, but there's sort of like a, how would I explain it, a metro noise coming from the back. It's a classic for those who are a big fan of Fast and Furious. It's actually not the identical same car, but it's the same car that was driven by DK, Drift King. Who was the villain in that movie? But you know, nevertheless. So we actually have a weird, a sort of whining noise coming from the rear of the car. It increases directly proportionally to the speed of the car, which leans towards it not being the transmission and more towards being either the differential, a drive shaft bearing, or maybe a wheel bearing. So there's some certain diagnosis you can do while driving, which is, for example, does the tone change whether you let off or get on the throttle, because that would lean more towards it being the differential. Or for example, does it change tone when you turn left and right, which puts those on the wheel bearing. In our case today, the noise actually changes with the speed of the car. It does not change if we get on the throttle or let off the throttle, and it does change when you turn left and right. So that leans it to being sort of like a wheel bearing issue, and the more you listen to it, the more it does sort of come from either side of the car. In this case, it is the rear right side. So what we're going to do now is take off the back right tire and see whether we notice anything strange while rotating the disc, and we can basically isolate it being a bearing. First, back into the garage. Jack point, we just basically put it onto the rear differential. Now we're going to undo these 5 21mm bolts. Yours might be a bit different depending on what rims you have, or if you're also running a spacer like this car. So jack it up, take these off, and then after jacking it up, I just want to point out how much lift and drop this. You could basically turn this thing into an off-road machine. Look at that. That is how much basically travel the suspension has. That's insane. Let me turn this into an off-road 350Z. Those are some lightweight wheels. Here you can hear the bearing noise. So now what you could do, which is what I've already done, is I've chucked the front wheels, taken off the other tire, and you can put the car into gear, and they basically listen if there's any abnormal noises coming from this side or the other side. So I diagnosed that it was actually this side that was making noises. So now what we got to do is take off the spacer, take off the disc, take off the brake caliper, and then get access to the wheel bearing. So since the center axle actually goes through the wheel bearing, we're gonna have to take off this nut as well. And it might be easier while the disc is still on the car, so we're able to apply the brakes, pull the handbrake maybe, or have someone in the driver's seat, so we can undo this nut in here. So we have the center nut for the axle off, which was a 33mm nut. Then the 19mm bolts for the spacer. And now we've got two 17mm bolts in the back that hold the caliper on. We'll hang that out the way, take the disc off, and then we should get access to the bolts holding on the bearing. Those are definitely not factory washers. Don't know who put those on. I'll take a zip tie, run it through anywhere where you can basically hang it onto, and then we'll take this off like so and hang it. Now that we have the disc off, we've got to, so this is basically the front hub, which connects to the bearing, as you can see in there. What we have to do is unbolt the rear axle from the differential, which are, I believe, 6 14mm bolts. Then we can slide the axle out backwards, and then we can have access to the rear bolts that hold in the wheel bearing, basically. So let's do that. And here we have our 14mm bolts. So for this, I had to put the car back into park and pull the handbrake in order to lock the axle in place so that we could actually put some power behind it and undo the nuts and bolts. So we've got 6 of these. What we're gonna do is we're gonna undo the bottom 3 now, then put the car back into neutral and turn it 180 degrees so that the other 3 are then facing us. So now we've undone all the axle bolts. You can push it over to the side, and then, oh, well, we might have to mallet it from the outside because it's a bit stuck. Slightly seized inside here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the nut, put it back on, and once the end is flush, the end of the stud is flush with the nut, we're gonna give it a couple of taps. Should be it out the back. So the reason why I put the nut on is so that we don't destroy the threads themselves. Axle's out, and now we have to undo, with the focus, 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts that hold on the bearing. And then hopefully we can separate it from the knuckle. Finally got these 4 19mm bolts out the back, and they were a pain to get out, just I guess because of the age of the car and that these haven't been removed in years. So now we're able to pull this out the front. Here we go. And we can, actually now we'll probably be able to hear how rough it spins. Right, let me try and see if I can get you a better. So this is actually supposed to spin smooth, and it's very, very rough. Now let's compare that to the new one, which we already have. So we can tell the bearing inside has definitely seen better days. Now we compare that to the new one. Absolutely no noise whatsoever. So there's a problem. Now I'm not sure if we have to get this pressed out or if we're able to just hammer it out. And we're off to go to the machine shop because it turns out that you actually have to use a hydraulic press in order to remove the hub from the wheel bearing. So we're gonna go get that done now, and then hopefully I'll be able to record how they push it on, just in case anyone's curious how that gets done. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So let's see how that turns out. The new bearing pressed on, as you can see. Sadly, you do have to go to a machine shop that has a press, because that is a press fit. But now we're good, so we can go back, install it, and see if she runs smooth. So we got the part back. Now we're just gonna clean up the inner ring that rests up against the wheel bearing, just to make the installation a lot cleaner, and then it'll just be the reverse of what we just took out. So let's get that done. So it turns out there is a actual direction to install this. So this small little dimple has to be facing upwards, and then all the holes do line up. Got the axle back in. So just remember to do the 14mm bolts, 6 of them at the back. Now we're gonna tighten the what size was this again? 33mm bolt, main axle bolt, and then make sure we put a pin so that it doesn't back out. Put the disc on, caliper, tire, drop it down, test drive. So we're all back together now, just out for our little test drive on the main road. And I have to say, apart from all of these atrocious exhaust noises coming from underneath, I guess there's a few leaks, but pretty smooth, pretty buttery. I would say that's fixed. So that's another thing off the to-do list. Let's see what's next. Stay tuned.